Hello, I'm Jeanne Meserve, and welcome to the 8th Annual Symposium on Pediatric Device Innovation. We're actually talking today about the lack of innovation. We're going to talk about why that's an issue, what can be done to change it, and improve and save young lives. We have a couple of terrific panelists today. Let me introduce them. With us is Dr. Kurt Newman. He is President and CEO of Children's National. He is a surgeon and a nationally recognized pediatric health expert. Also with us is Dr. Michelle McMurry-Heath. She is President and CEO of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, known as BIO. She is also a doctor and a molecular immunologist and has worked in government and in academia and also in industry, so has a wealth of perspectives. Thank you both for being with me here today. Dr. Newman, I would like to start with you and like to talk about the problem. How big is the gap in pediatric devices between what you need and what you actually have?
Thank you, and it's terrific to be with you, Jeanne, and my great friend, Michelle, and colleague. You know, for me, it goes back to my roots as a surgeon, as a pediatric surgeon, taking kids here at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C., and it was all about tools. And as I saw the technology shift and advances made in medicine, all too frequently, children were not thought about. They were left behind, and for many reasons. But so as a surgeon, it was really frustrating, for example, to see all of the great work and advances made in minimally invasive surgery, for example, that couldn't really be applied to children. And when we did want to apply that to children, we had to use these big devices and technology that were made for adults, but we had to adapt them to children. And you can just imagine trying to operate on babies and do things with things that were created for adults. I mean, right off the bat, you realize there's a big size difference, or there's a big, not that we couldn't figure out ways to do that, but it was always, it just felt like, why aren't we able to do this for children? What's the holdup? What are the hurdles and challenges? And as I dug into it more and more, you just realize that there were all these barriers and hurdles where maybe it's because the market wasn't big enough, or the universities and science and medicals weren't geared that way. It just felt like children were being left behind. And so that was extremely frustrating to me. But, you know, with that comes the pressure and the desire to innovate, because, you know, that's how you're going to move forward.
We're going to touch on all of those things that you mentioned. Before we do, Dr. McMurry-Heath, let me ask you, if this lack of pediatric devices, is it actually jeopardizing lives of children?
Most definitely. And it doesn't just stretch to pediatric devices, but also diagnostics as well. You know, we really need appropriate tools and approaches that work in children and have been proven in children. And so we will all want to see that happen. When I was Associate Center Director for Science in the Center for Devices at the Food and Drug Administration, we would see this every day. And no matter what tools and incentives we tried to use to bring more innovators to the table with solutions for children, it was never quite enough. So we need to do more, and we need to do better.
Dr. Newman mentioned this practice of using off-label adult devices in children. Dr. McMurry-Heath, let me ask you your opinion. Is that any kind of solution here?
No, it's completely inadequate. And yet we understand that the bind that innovators get into, you bring a device to market, perhaps with an adult indication, and then they're asked to come back again with the appropriate trials to prove that it works in children and in a specific age group of children. And some are just unwilling or unable to go that extra mile. So we need to see even more flexibility on the behalf of regulators to really work with innovators to make sure it's as easy as possible for them to do those additional studies so that we can have the extra added confidence that when we adapt these tools to children, that they're appropriate for them.
Dr. Newman, talk a little bit about the design challenges of making devices for children. Obviously, they're small, you mentioned that, but also they're growing, they're moving around a lot. Does that make it more difficult to design a device for them?
Well, that's right. And it's a little hard for me to talk in front of a pediatrician like Michelle, but when you think about it too, a lot of the problems, just going back to the problems and diseases and the things you're trying to treat are different. So, if you're using the approach of using adult technology, it may not even be designed to tackle the types of clinical problems and diagnoses that we're dealing with. So that in and of itself is a big hurdle, because you'd want to maybe start from scratch, but then the design of how you have to bring some to the market really can be a problem, because frequently, and I'd be interested in her take on this, but you have to make sure it's safe. And a lot of times all of those safety studies need to be done in adults first and then done in children. Well, if the disease doesn't even, or problem doesn't even happen in adults, how do you even, move forward with that? So that's a big question mark. Another one is, in trying to commercialize things, the standard classical approach is, well, let's look at the market. How would we be able to get a financial return on our investment? Well, a lot of times the issues in children are not, if you, up front, the way you classically analyze it may not suggest that there's a market. So the companies don't want to take it on, or the investors don't want to do that. So you don't have the capital and the things you need to even do the initial testing. So when she mentioned that it's hard to get sometimes an interest level in that, frequently that's what's meant. And then there's all the issues of size and as you, Jeanne, mentioned, thinking about development, thinking about just the issues specifically around children that come into play depending on what you're trying to tackle. But nevertheless, it creates this, because of all of that, it creates this huge force for innovation, because you want to try and solve for all of those issues.
Dr. McMurry-Heath, I want to dig deeper on everything that Dr. Newman just mentioned, but as the innovation person here, I'm kind of curious, because when you look at technology writ large, there's so much innovation going on that involves miniaturization and 3D printing. And I would think to a certain degree, this opens the door to terrific innovation in the pediatric device space. Should it? Does it?
It should, but it should a lot more than it does. So, Kurt was right on the money. Most children, thank goodness, are healthy. But it's heartbreaking when children have illnesses, and their illnesses and disorders are sometimes very, very different than the profile or the illnesses that we see in adults. And the sequelae are very different as well. So it's so important that we actually have the testing for the diseases and the illnesses that impact kids in kids. This has to be done. Miniaturization does help, but that basically just brings us to the point that the science is there, the technology is there, the know-how is there, but we still have to have the investment of time and resources to get across the finish line to really get the devices through the clinical trials in the pediatric population.
Dr. Newman, is one potential way to address the investment problem to flip the problem and develop things for children and then adapt them to adults? That would create a larger market? And would that be then putting the horse before the cart instead of the other way around?
Well, I think that's right. I think that's just a incredibly thoughtful insight. And a lot of innovators and companies are coming around to that. It's almost, if you can do it in children, then there may be applications in the adult world. And, an example I use is one of our anesthesiologists, for example, was challenged around pain and measurement of pain. And she, Julie Finkel is her name, and Julie was struck by, well, it's not enough to have these, you've probably seen these pain scores and with the smiley faces, and you pick one and that works for some kids and it works for adults, but think about smaller children or babies, and it's not very accurate either. It's not very objective. So she was forced by that when she's trying to figure out whether a pain medication or pain strategy works, she was forced to think differently because that wasn't going to move the science forward or really allow for any new approaches to pain in children. So her passion was to create a technology that would be able to measure pain objectively, so that we could tell using analysis of the brain's response to painful stimuli what your pain score was, like a vital sign. And through a lot of number of years of testing and trial and error, she's come up with something that looks very, very promising. So the idea then was, well, look, if we're going to be measuring this in children, certainly that's going to have an even bigger market in the adult world, because pain and the management of pain, and you even think about the opioid crisis, which that's at the heart of that. Just think about the market potential there. So all of a sudden, as people see the proof, start seeing the proof of concept for children, they think, oh my gosh, think about this bigger market that could be solved. So there are a lot, that can be a very effective strategy.
Dr. McMurry-Heath, will industry buy into it? What do you think?
Well, it's so challenging. So much of our innovation comes from our very small, innovative companies. We're doing a COVID tracker right now, and of all the therapies and devices that are being tried in that space, 70% of them are coming from our smallest biotech companies, for example. And a lot of these companies are in a race against time. They are trying to get their innovation to market as soon as possible so that they can keep the lights on, so that they can keep producing great innovations and keep paying their scientists. It's really a dog-eat-dog world. That's not immediately obvious from the outside. And so when you think about that, and you think about how most children are blessedly healthy, trying to do a clinical trial and enroll a large number of patients in a short period of time is often very difficult in the pediatric setting. And so if you want to get that very first approval, so you can at least have proof of principle and at least make it to market, it's so much easier to start in the adult setting where you have more access to patients in need. So that makes it very, very difficult. And then there's the logistical challenges of doing trials in children. I remember when I was at Johnson & Johnson, we had an artificial pancreas that had an adult indication that we wanted to get through a pediatric indication. And FDA said to us, well, we want you to do a 3-month in-hospital study. And you think about children missing 3 months of school and how challenging that is to try to enroll a trial that takes children out of school and their parents have to attend to them while they're there. It's not the same sort of limitations as when you're working with adults.
So this is a shot in the dark question, but I'm curious. If there's greater liability for device developers and manufacturers in the pediatric space than in the adult space, that's a jump ball. Either of you want to tackle that?
I don't know if it's really the liability that stops innovators. Innovators are used to dealing in a benefit risk setting where, you know, they hope to have a net positive impact for patients, but there's always a chance, a possibility that they won't. And so they try as hard as they can to do everything they can to really bring more benefit than risk to the patients they treat. And that's true whether the patient is large or small. You really want to get that right. It's just a challenge of being able to try to do the trials in the pediatric setting.
Dr. Newman, do you need more flexibility from the FDA when it comes to trials?
Well, I think the FDA is making a lot of progress, and certainly Michelle was a big part of that, of this understanding, and I've been impressed by their recognition of the, you know, the regulators there and the doctors and scientists they work with about this problem, and they put in some very, very creative ways to move things forward. One of those is the creation of consortiums, and we happen to be a part of one with the University of Maryland, where they funded Children's National and the University of Maryland to create a consortium that would find these companies. And Michelle's right, these are frequently, it's a one investigator, small company that's got a great idea, but they are trying to find funding to get that, do that next step or that next study. And so there's, I think, now 4 around the country to promote device innovation in children.
And you run one of them, right?
And we do run one of them. I'm proud to say that, because I've seen the outcomes of these things and the competitions that happen in these companies, and they're not companies just from Children's National or from the University of Maryland. We create the resources and the pathways to help these folks along.
So walk us through how it works exactly. Compare it to Shark Tank or whatever is appropriate.
Well, I mean, that's a perfect example. I think, Michelle, you might have even been a judge on a couple of these, where people are given the opportunity to bring their ideas or their companies to, and it is a competition. And I think it's by competing for then resources, the competition in and of itself is rigorous enough that it strengthens their ideas, and it gives them, but it also creates an audience for others, and maybe it's investors or collaborators or other partners to come in and help them. And then the ones that then benefit from the resources that the consortium can give, they can fine-tune their approach, or they learn the strategy of working with the FDA, or maybe they learn how to put a business plan together and that really speaks to getting investments.
Can you talk a little bit more specifically about exactly what resources they do get? What do you provide to the winners?
Well, it really depends on the need. But in some places, in some ways, sometimes it's coaching and bringing in an expert in that has brought companies to that next stage or level, or maybe it's guiding them to some other people working in that field that might be a great partner to help them expand how they're thinking. It really kind of gets to the specific needs of that company. And then a lot of it is, how do you move through the regulatory process? So, because this is being funded by the FDA at the heart of it. So how do you interact with the FDA? And there's so many opportunities within. People think of the FDA as this way, and Michelle should comment on this, but as this kind of behemoth, monolith that isn't necessarily responsive. I've found that now more and more not to be true. They want to actually partner with these companies, with the universities, with the hospitals, because I think at the heart of it, although they're trying to protect our people, but at the heart of it, they want to see these things succeed just as much as we do.
So
Yeah,
you
no,
mentioned
I
there
think
have, oh, go ahead, excuse me.
no, Kurt is absolutely right. You know, the professionals at the FDA are public health advocates at heart. And what they're really interested in it is what improves the health outcomes of the people of the US. And so they've seen more and more over the years that innovation is a huge piece of that. And so facilitating innovation has become an important part of their mission. And that flexibility is to be applauded. I think it's starting to yield benefits, but you know, innovation today is a team sport. It is not an easy thing to do, and it takes lots of different areas of expertise and collaboration. And so projects like the Pediatric Device Consortium, where you bring those different expertise to bear, are really important to make progress.
Dr. Newman, you mentioned that there have been successes because of this consortium. Tell us about those, if you would.
Well, I think the number is something like about 100 companies have received mentorship from our consortium, and I think 7 of those are children's. So I'll be you know I'll brag a little bit about that. But 7 of those companies are, or I'm sorry, 7 of the devices in have received FDA clearance going through this program. So it does work. And we've had a number of our own. We've had 20 startup companies that haven't all gone through that program, but you know, it also helps create a culture of innovation and creativity, which I think is so important. And I feel like that has begun to turn. One of the other approaches with the FDA is something that's that they've created with a lot of stakeholders called SHIP, which is a system, I think it's a system of hospitals innovating in pediatrics. That's the acronym SHIP. And so it's bringing all these stakeholders together more broadly, independent of these consortiums, to talk about how we can move pediatric innovation forward. And I think it's been, it just got started within the last year. So it's another way that the FDA, through its Center for Devices and Radiological Health, I think that's what it's called, it has recognized the problem, bringing people together to try and lower the threat, lower the barriers, so that companies and innovators can be successful.
Dr. McMurry-Heath, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And as mentioned, the FDA has various divisions that handle different things, but I have to imagine that a lot of attention, a lot of resources right now are going towards COVID-19. Are you seeing that? Is that having a negative impact on innovation and pediatric devices and the approval process?
Yeah, it's a very critical thing for us to keep our eyes on right now. And you may think that it's targeted at one particular part of FDA, but we're actually seeing the impact of COVID across the spectrum. So you take the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, it both has responsibility for all of our COVID diagnostics as well as personal protective equipment, both of which we know are very hot areas of concern and attention these days. So we are starting to see kind of the signs of stress and strain. I think FDA has been doing a heroic job, and the individual scientists there are incredibly committed, but they're under a lot of pressure and there is a lot coming at them. So we have a COVID tracker, for example, and since the start of the pandemic, we've noted that around the globe, there have been over 720 product development projects put in market that have been started just to combat COVID. Over 180 vaccines in development, 9 of which are in phase 3 clinical trials. That just tells you that there's a huge amount of technology and innovation coming at the FDA at this particular moment in time, in addition to all of the other disease areas and public health needs that we have. So we're trying everything we can to advocate for resources for the FDA, to speak out in support of their independence and their scientific integrity, and trying to relieve the political pressure that, if anything, is only worsening that stress and strain, because we want the scientists to be free to use their science.
And I'm very curious about this, Dr. Newman. If you still have total credibility in the FDA, as you know, writ large, the agency has had a lot thrown at it during COVID, and it has taken a lot of criticism. Are you confident that where it comes to this particular topic of pediatric devices, they are still an organization of integrity and that will do right by the process?
Absolutely. I think the people that have made a career choice to work there, it's something that they're doing because they're passionate about the outcomes. I think they recognize the problem that we're talking about, where, you know, I think it's something like less than 4% of the devices are dealing with children and newborns and 2-year-old. I mean, just think about that. And they want to see this solution. But, you know, we've got a pandemic, and, you know, there's a certain amount of focus that needs to happen on that. But I have a lot of confidence in their integrity and their ability.
Here. I just want to second that. And we've seen it across the board. The scientists at the FDA are beyond reproach, and they're doing a yeoman's job at trying to see us through this crisis.
This is the age of data. And you've mentioned the problems with trials and how difficult they are to do with children. Is there enough sharing of data? Can it be done internationally, for instance, so that people who are working devices in Germany can communicate with people in Canada, can communicate with people in the US, and through that sort of collaboration, can you push forward the approval process a little bit more quickly? Is that allowed by law?
Well, it certainly happens. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. You can pull international clinical trial data. It requires a few extra steps, but it is a very important part of the process, an important part of going forward. What really we're looking for in the future is the ability to shift towards collecting real world data, so that you're not just collecting data about how devices perform in a formal clinical trial, but you're also learning from any of those off-label uses. You're also learning from how the device is perhaps working in the broader adult population over time. You're able to see, even after a device is approved, whether or not it's performing to the standard that you expect. And if for any reason it's not, you're then able to pull back and perhaps reverse course. So that kind of assurance you can only get from a system where you can pick up in real time from electronic health records how patients are responding to devices and other new medical innovations. And that sort of system is critical to construct, and it's in the process of being built.
But
I would say, just to add on to that, you know, that's true for, Michelle's absolutely right about the regulatory side of it and getting the approvals and making sure things are safe. But before that, I think the globalization and the interactions with around the world and the communication has promoted innovation and creativity, because a lot of times the hurdles in maybe less developed countries and their health systems and how they're trying to provide care forces innovation that here may not be as needed, because we have so many other resources and assets. So a surgeon working in a less developed country might be forced to have a different approach to bring that baby or child through. And then learning about that creates additional opportunities.
That's a great point.
Money. We've talked about the reluctance of companies to invest, and that sometimes the small companies don't have the money to invest. What about money from the government? How much does Congress appropriate? Does it come to you through the FDA, through the NIH? Is it enough? I can bet you want more. Dr. Newman, you want to take that first?
Well, we always want more.
I know.
And,
I knew the answer to that question before I asked it.
Even if we had everything we needed, we'd be wanting more. But it is true. And when you look at the NIH budget, or you just realize the disparity in what the funding is for pediatrics and children. Michelle probably knows the exact figures, but if you look at cancer research, for example, it's the magnitude is of what we're putting into pediatric cancer care and research is way out of proportion. And to me, that's never made sense, because if you think about it, the earlier and that you in a disease like cancer, if you solve for that early, you're just saved a lifetime. And think of all the disability and pain and things in life that you've saved. So it feels like the priorities really are reversed. The other thing we're learning is that investments made early may prevent adult diseases. I mean, more and more we're learning the impact of genetics, or whether it's mental health, or whether it's heart disease. Michelle mentioned diabetes. If you make these interventions early, you can prevent a lot of the complications or even the appearance of the disease later. And I think people are starting to come around to that. But there does need to be a relook at our priorities and how we look at where we place our investments.
Yeah, I think that's such a critical point, because we need a better system of valuing innovation. Because right now we are really not placing the largest value on the innovations that have the biggest impact on patient health, on eventual productivity, on just wellness and the ability to contribute and enjoy your life with your family. So that is a major failing across the system, and it has a disproportionate impact in the pediatric space, where you can have, a small change can save an entire lifetime of health. So that is something we really need to speak out for.
And when Michelle made that comment about real world data, that is so important. So a lot of times that's not collected or even thought through in trials, and it's now just coming to people's understanding of, well, what's that quality of life like? And maybe it's not this, when we do these financial analyses, we're not taking all of those things, but part of it is we've never really collected that kind of data or studied it that way. And I'm so proud that she and others are pushing that hard, because that is going to drive a lot of the decision making. If you don't have that data, you're just making it an emotional case. You're not, you don't have the real hard analytics that you need to make the case.
Before we leave the money issue completely, Dr. McMurry-Heath, I'm wondering if there are other things that Congress could do that would help innovation move forward. For instance, tax incentives.
Well, it's definitely worth considering. One of the major issues in the pediatric space is that so many of our children depend upon the Medicaid program, and the reimbursement rates in the Medicaid program are slim and uneven, I guess is the way to put it. It's so dependent on individual state budgets, and they can wax and wane over time. So I think as long as our children depend on that very vulnerable safety net, it's going to make innovation for them very challenging. So we need to think about how we raise all tall ships when it comes to insurance coverage, because all insurance coverage is not created equal today, and that's unfortunate.
So one of the things I've found, I got really frustrated, like Michelle is talking about. So I was running the surgery department at Children's National, and our hospital, it's a nonprofit, and our focus is we've got to just take care of the kids and provide the best care. But we also want to do the research and the innovation. But when you're dealing with a population of kids, and there's such disparities of care in our country right now, and the pandemic has really even highlighted that even more. But over half of the children we take care of are on Medicaid. So we weren't going to get that kind of resources from the government, but philanthropy and philanthropists is another avenue. And so we were able to get a major gift, a major donation to create something called the Sheikh Zayed Institute for Pediatric Surgical Innovation that was set up to fund these great ideas to make, in this case, surgery more precise and less invasive and hopefully someday pain-free. And it's been terrific. I mean, it's done what we wanted it to do because it gave us some freedom to fail, to take some chances, and to look at a real fundamental problem that we've been talking about of how do we even get started. And I think it started changing people's minds and people began, in other hospitals, began thinking, hey, we can be in this game too. Then the great also possibility is if you have some winners and you deal with the intellectual property and all of the creation of companies in the right way, it creates a new revenue stream for that entity.
Dr. Newman, you're involved in a different innovation project, and we can't leave that out of this conversation, or you're trying to create an ecosystem that will facilitate innovation. Tell us about that project. Well,
it's great having Michelle on this panel with me because she was also an architect of what I'm going to be talking about. And that was just to think completely differently about creating a campus, an ecosystem, if you will, for pediatric innovation, whether it was devices, drugs, technology. And what we came up with in Washington, D.C., and we had the opportunity because a military base, the Walter Reed Army Medical Center, was closing. And we were able to secure 12 acres and the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology building, research buildings, to create something that really hadn't ever been before. And that's a campus for innovation for children. A lot of innovation campuses, hubs around the country and around the world for just innovation in general, but nothing specific for children. And here we are in Washington, D.C., the Children's Hospital. We've got this campus. We're close to the NIH. We're close to the FDA. There's a lot of investment capital here. There's a big infrastructure in Maryland and Virginia. But we had all of these kind of ground resources to do something really, really cool on this site. And but we needed partners, and the best partner in this was Johnson & Johnson and J Labs. They had created these incubator accelerators around the country. There were 8 or 9 of them around the United States, 2 or 3 more around the world. And we went to them, and full disclosure, Michelle was part of Johnson & Johnson at that time and probably one of our strongest champions. And they thought this was fantastic. They thought, my goodness, what a great idea. We can bring our track record of promoting 20, 30, 40 companies in an incubator setting. It can be alongside Children's National and our research institute, which will be housed there. Virginia Tech will be our academic partner, and they will have research. And there'll be more and more partners, but it's a public-private partnership with, if you will, but all about innovation and creativity. And as we've been working on it all through the pandemic, we decided this is a priority. We need to open this up. Michelle mentioned vaccines. J&J's got a vaccine. They have a partnership with BARDA, which is a federal agency in HHS that promotes vaccine development. And they created something called Blue Night that is this partnership, which will, between BARDA and Johnson & Johnson and J Labs, which will really try and push the global innovation network of all of these entities forward. So it's right here in Washington, D.C., and it's focused on children. That's the big message. It's focused on children. So we can really create a whole new look-see, how people look at innovation. I'd like to say to the CEOs out there, where else would you want to be? If you, with a startup company, if you wanted to talk to the NIH, the FDA, Capitol Hill, the Patent Office, maybe some investigators at Children's National, all in one day, you tell me what another place in the country or the world where you could do that.
Yeah. Pretty enthusiastic about this.
Yeah.
why did a company like Johnson & Johnson, why did they want to be involved in something like this?
Well, Kurt is very generous to call me an architect. It was more like a cheerleader, a chief cheerleader, but it was such a great idea. Johnson & Johnson and many other large pharmaceutical companies really function by looking out across the horizon and identifying great and up and coming entrepreneurs that are really trying to develop their scientific concepts, and they're taking the big risks and make the big intellectual leaps of faith, and then trying to support that work and potentially partner with them or eventually acquire them. And so JLabs is, like many in our industry, an incubator that allows them to say, you've got a great idea, come into our space, we'll support you, we'll help you in that team sport of innovation to get that idea to something that can actually help patients. And so when you also bring in organizations like BARDA, which is in the biodefense space, and Children's National, which has such a strong history of championing children's health, and the innovation and production engine that is a great pharmaceutical company like J&J, then you get just a great collaboration and a great nexus. So that is what they're building at the Children's Innovation Campus, and I can't wait to see it fully open because it's going to be marvelous.
And when is it supposed to open? What's the date?
Well, we're looking at the first quarter of 2021, so somewhere in the January, February timeframe. We kept the construction going all through the pandemic, and people have been, the Mayor Bowser and the City Council have been right in there foursquare with us to get this across the finish line. So I'm really excited to have everybody, when we can, be together to celebrate that.
And is the space fully occupied at this point, or do you still have room for other companies to come in?
Well, we're doing this in phases, so over time there will definitely be opportunities for companies to come in, but certainly there's opportunities for companies to come in right now into the JLab space. So I think we already have, or they, but us together, have 10 companies that are going to already have committed to being hosted within JLab. So they're having all sorts of competitions to get into the into that portion of it. And then down the line, we'll have some other buildings and space there. So it's going to be a real also economic driver and job creation and create just an incredible resource. But again, focused on children.
Michelle, there's something else I'd like to touch on, and that's intellectual property. In the COVID space, for example, there has been a lot of espionage going on and theft. And is it happening in the pediatric device space? Are you worried about it? How do you prevent it? And is that part of the planning for this innovation hub?
Well, Kurt can answer the planning that they have on the Innovation Center, but in general, intellectual property is a really challenging area in medical devices. I mean, if you think about the wars that we've seen in recent years between Apple and the iPhone and Samsung, and how difficult it is to prove that an engineering advance is truly unique and that the patent is easy to protect and defend, it's impossible for these very, very large companies even to protect their IP in a really stringent way. So the device space is a bit of the Wild West when it comes to intellectual property, and that also hampers investment in the innovation. And if we could find, legal innovations to help protect that IP, it would help tremendously.
Dr. Newman, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think Michelle is absolutely right. It's a growing challenge, particularly since the reliance on a lot of information technology, if you will, creates access points for, I'll say the bad, and I'm talking about security now, but the bad guys to get the data you want. If you look at the intellectual property side of it, the same issues, how do you protect that? And that's where the value and the investment comes from. I think, though, that some of the topics we touched on are ways to solve for that. So the collaboration and and working together, and these, whether it's the incubators or whether it's the consortiums we talked about, those are ways for people to learn and protect their intellectual property, because that's such a crucial part of being able to bring something to market.
We're almost out of time, and I wanted each of you to give me your wish list. In the vast landscape of pediatric devices, what do you most want to see developed? Dr. McMurry-Heath, why don't I go to you first?
Well, we're spending a lot of time these days thinking about COVID all the time, and I have an 8-year-old who's recently returned to in-person learning. So my wish list is instantaneous COVID diagnostics that can be delivered at the point of care or point of public convening. And I don't think that's very far away, but it's a bit short-sighted, but I think it's going to help us get back to normal. And I think it's particularly important for our children, where we, see a large number of asymptomatic cases.
Dr. Newman, what's on your list?
Well, I've got a long list. How much time do I have?
You're the boss. You can take as much as you want.
But, even Michelle's example is that when the pandemic was first being thought about and reported on, everybody said, kids aren't really affected. We don't need to pay attention to them that much. We need to focus on adults. And at Children's National, we didn't have that approach. We thought, every pandemic, every virus in history has had big impact on children. And it may play out differently. And look at what we're finding. That's absolutely true, whether it's a syndrome and the long-term effects on the heart, or whether they're a place for spread, or now just the unseen consequences of the psychological consequences and the school and all the impact of that. So that really goes back to how we started. I think I'd love to see this sea change in understanding and put children first, whether it's devices, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's pharmaceutical research, to really turn it upside down, because I think there's so much benefit to our children, our families, and our country. It just makes perfect sense.
And we have to leave it there. Perfect note for it. Dr. Kurt Newman, CEO and President of Children's National, thank you for joining us. Dr. McMurry-Heath, President and CEO of Bio, also thanks for your insights. And to all of you out there who joined us for this discussion, thank you for your time. I'm Jeanne Meserve. Please stay healthy.